this is Chaircare subsidies and household labor supply, and is joined with the two Turks here, Nezi and Remzi Kaygusuz. Okay, so many people have been thinking about labor supply in recent times with more intensity than before, and we've been there too. Okay, so a part of the work in labor supply is about determinants of female labor supply. In particular, there is some good work on the effects of childcare subsidies in this issue. I mean, one key finding of this literature is that the cost of childcare and the availability of childcare is a key central determinant of female labor supply. So we're going to take this idea seriously here from the perspective of a macro public finance policy analysis. Okay, so we're going to focus on the macro implications of a large expansion of childcare subsidies in the United States. Okay, in particular, the whole paper is going to be around the question of what are labor supply, output, and welfare effects of subsidizing childcare in the U.S. economy. Think of this as in one line of implementing Scandinavian-style childcare subsidies in the United States. Okay, so what we're going to do is the following: we're going to develop and analyze a life cycle economy. A life cycle economy that is going to have several features. I mean, there's going to be married and single people. These people are going to be heterogeneous. They're going to be labor supply decisions at the household level, and of course, there's going to be some central notions of cost which are buried. Okay. In many ways, this is going to be based upon our previous work with these two guys. And then we're going to do what we know. We're going to parameterize this economy to be consistent with a host of observations, both at the aggregate and the cross-sectional level. Okay, we're going to focus on gender and skill premium, labor force participation, marital sorting, and the cost of children. And then, of course, we're going to use this framework to think about policy. We're going to evaluate childcare subsidies within the framework. Okay. A couple of lines on why we care. I think personally that childcare subsidies are very interesting from a policy standpoint. I'm not going. They are very interesting from a policy standpoint because of this is a particular form of transfers that in many ways provide substantial degrees of redistribution and do not have the typical perverse effects on labor supply. Okay, so from this standpoint, they are quite appealing for many people. Well, of course, we know that labor supply is quite elastic, and female labor supply is quite elastic, and is quite responsive to incentives. Potentially, we can expect big effects out of childcare subsidies. Okay.
What's special about this as opposed to just subsidizing labor supply?
Well, it's going to be
lower transport costs or something.
Well, you will see. I mean, we're going to focus on a particular type of policies that are attached to labor force participation. The policies that will subsidize, in particular, certain types of women at a point during the life cycle. They can be conditioned on the level of income. They can be targeted to certain types of skills and so on. Okay.
Do you have fertility?
I'm sorry.
That would be better. Do you have fertility? That would be
Endogenous fertility in this project so far, no, but there will be some non-trivial notions of fertility differences. Okay, so it's going to come.
Can I ask one question?
Yeah.
Are you going to also clarify whose welfare we're talking about here? I mean, are you going to subsume both the children? There well may be trade-offs.
Yeah. Children. We are going to be talking about the welfare of adults. Okay, so largely because of. I'm sorry.
Which creates a societal tension, right?
Yeah, I admit it. Yeah, immediately there's a tension. I mean, we're basically going to be silent on the welfare of children, largely because there are two sides of views. I mean, some people think that than putting children on child care can be good, and some people think otherwise. So yeah.
Can I just add to what John was saying? So you're going to compare like a child care subsidy with just say like a lump sum subsidy or something, or it's just going to be?
Well, how about if I show you what we do? Okay. Yeah, it's going to be very, very precise. So potentially there can be large effects, and of course these subsidies have to be financed, and typically they're financed through distortionary taxation. There can be some non-trivial trade-offs. Well, we know basically that in Europe, in particular Scandinavia, childcare subsidies are big. They account for nearly 1% of output. In the U.S., they are essentially non-existent, although there is a program that is the Childcare and Development Fund, the CCDF, out of which we know little about potential expansion. So we're going to take this program as a starting point. It's a program that is, as I will argue, is a means tested scheme, and we're going to think about potential large macro expansions of this program. Okay. So before we get lost in the maze of questions and so on, let me advertise a couple of model features that our analysis will have that we think are critical to think about childcare subsidies. First of all, we're going to model in some detail the extensive margin of labor supply, the labor supply participation decisions in married households. Okay. Second, we're going to account for costly childbearing, both in married and single households. Okay. And in this context, we're going to be thinking about mean-tested childcare subsidies. Okay. This is going to be nice, I think, because it will allow us a clean analysis of the expansion. And the expansion can go in different ways. It can go in terms of availability of subsidies, in terms of expanding this to a wider range of people, and in terms of their generosity. Okay. The third thing, which I think is key, is that we're going to allow some skill depreciation of females coming from childbearing disruptions, okay? And this is going to allow us to capture potential increases in female skills coming from labor force participation induced by the subsidies. So some of the potential effects of childcare subsidies on female skills are going to be precisely captured in what we're going to do, okay? So I'd like to talk about the model in some detail, so I'll go and talk the model, and then I'll tell you the data we look at, how we parameterize the model, and so on. Okay. So the model is going to be a life cycle economy. People are going to live up to J periods. There's going to be a working age period, and then people are going to be retired after age JR. There are different layers of heterogeneity. The first layer is that they're going to be males and females. And these males and females are going to be intrinsically heterogeneous at the start of the life cycle in their skills, their permanent skills that we're going to later associate to education. So we're going to call males Z. Male types are going to be Z. And these male types are going to map into productivity profiles, wages, for males that are going to be depending on their intrinsic type and age, J. Okay? Females are going to be...
Sorry, what's J?
I'm sorry?
What's J?
J is age.
Age.
Age. Okay? Females are going to be, as usual, more interesting. They're going to have an intrinsic type at the start of the life cycle. This type is, from the biology literature, I think is called X. And this is going to map into initial levels of skills, age, okay? Age at age 1, okay? And after age 1, these skills are going to evolve endogenously. And they will evolve according to some exogenous component that we read from data, this growth component, okay, which is going to apply if they work, okay, and a depreciation part when they do not work, okay. When they do not work, depreciation kicks in and the profiles depreciate at the rate delta. Yes.
Some people say that there's a big X on the delta.
A big X on the delta. Yes. Yes.
I don't see it there.
No, I don't see it either. No, I know. We're going to take delta as given. We're thinking about expanding this for accommodating for, yeah.
So,
No,
which way are you looking? Expanding it by sex, by occupation, or education? Or
well, I guess Victor is referring mostly about education. You know, highly skilled women may have a higher delta than less skilled women. I mean, I think it should also possibly depend on occupation, but yeah.
And hours work doesn't enter into this.
Well, our works are coming, so just
Into the accumulation.
no. This is all about if either you work or not.
The
Yeah.
Costs and delta.
Yeah.
You know, making the case that the big difference,
I'm sorry.
that the big difference is in the full-time educated. That's the one that gets
Yeah.
the huge depreciation. Anything else, there's no some.
We
no
can.
transaction.
Yeah. We can. Yeah.
So you can put a couple of costs.
Sure.
Put an extra code on the other.
Yeah. It's easy. It's easy to do.
So even if that's true, you can select occupations where depreciation is small.
No, that could be, but I'm saying that these people are working on this, claim that the big action is there, not there. But that the big action is in the location and the full-time.
No, as I was saying, so that's why I think you see a lot of people taking things like lawyers, where it's very easy to do, like maybe not work full, like half days or 3 days for a while, or
Okay.
medical practice, things like that.
And well, then we're going to consider to generate further heterogeneity in this model. There's going to be some additional heterogeneity within these skill types. Okay, so main labor endowments are going to be given by this function omega that I described before, corrected by an additional level that is going to be drawn at the start of the life cycle for males and ditto for females. Okay.
Do you know of any people have looked at if child care subsidies might affect the educational decision?
A priori, they could at the macro level we're going to be thinking of. Okay, we're not going to consider this here, although, I mean, it's in our radar screen. Yeah. So people can be singular married, and in this talk, in this paper, we're going to completely abstract from marriage market decisions. We're going to be very explicit about who gets married with whom. Okay. So people can be single and married, and married is going to be decided for you at the start of the life cycle. It's going to be decided by us. Okay. Who gets married with whom, and we're going to impose perfectly synchronized demographics. I mean, married people are going to be boring types. They're going to age, retire, and die together. Okay, and that's going to be stationary demographics. I will be precise about this, but the individuals, male and females, are going to value consumption and dislike work, and married households also are going to have some this utility that is going to be heterogeneous among them in terms of how much dislike joint participation in the labor market. And this is going to allow us to capture a host of heterogeneity in terms of who works within narrow classes. Okay. Well, as I will be precise about this, but married agents maximize the discounted sum of individual utilities. I mean, given all these assumptions, there's nothing to disagree upon. So the married problem is going to be complicated by all the levels of heterogeneity, but relatively simple in the sense I don't have to worry about outside options and things like that. Okay.
So
Consumption is going to be public. Yes. Now, let's talk about children. Okay. So married households and single females are going to have children, okay? And these children are married households and females are going to differ among the in terms of the children that are attached to them, okay? There are three possibilities. You can be a household without any children. You can have children early in the life cycle and children late in the life cycle, okay? So this is going to be denoted by B, but for childbearing status 0, 1, 2, okay? 0 is going to be without any children. Early childbearers are going to have children early in periods 1, 2, and 3 in the life cycle, okay? Late childbearers are going to have children later on, and this childbearing status is going to be mapped to what we see in the data by levels of education, okay? Now, in this talk, we are thinking about relaxing this, but in this talk, every household, when they have children, they're going to have 2, okay? Largely because when we look at the distribution when we look at the distribution of children across households, the average number of children is essentially around 2. Some highly skilled households have more than 2. Some less skilled households have slightly more than 2. So then there are childcare costs. Okay, if a female with children actually works, married or single doesn't matter, then the household has to pay for childcare costs. These childcare costs are going to have 2 components. The first one is going to be a pecuniary one, are going to depend on the age of the children. Okay, so providing for childcare services is going to require efficiency units of labor. These efficiency units of labor are going to be denoted by D, which will depend upon the age of the children. Okay, younger children are more costly than older children. Okay, so the household has to purchase efficiency units of labor at the wage rate W. Okay. Now, on top of this, young children are costly for the mother in terms of time. Okay, so they're going to impose a fixed time cost that in this case is going to be borne by the mother. This is going to be for young children. Think of this as children age 0 to 5. Okay.
So my understanding of the data is there's a third possibility. A lot of people are using informal arrangements, I guess, grandmothers or neighbors or even fathers or all sorts of stuff.
Yeah. Some of this is going to be capturing how we read these childcare costs. Okay.
Just to think about this, can you tell me what country you're going to be looking at? U.S.?
Yeah.
Why U.S.?
Why the U.S.?
No, I mean, you said U.S.
No. Why the U.S.?
The U.S. because we don't have any out there.
Yeah, it's about the U.S. Yeah.
So there's no choice of quality.
I'm sorry?
There's no choice.
No choice of quality.
So I'm thinking.
Sorry, what do you say? Quality?
There is no choice on the quality D.
So far, no. So far, no. We're doing it. It's coming. Yes, there will be. There is variation in how much households pay. Okay, not much, but there is, and it's in the data, and we are putting it together. It's not going. I think so far it's not going to be a big deal, but stay tuned. So subsidies, they're going to be means tested as it is in I think in Scandinavia and
actually they're not means tested. They used to have mean tested and they left it.
Okay, we're going to consider that case too. It's going to be here. So they're going to be in principle mean tested. So all households with childcare expenses are potentially eligible. So the cost of childcare is going to be corrected by 1 minus theta. Theta is the subsidy rate. If the household has income that is less than a threshold, and if not, the household doesn't have access to childcare subsidies. Of course, I can move this as much as I want, and I'm going to move theta as much as I want. So I have 2 key parameters. The 2 key parameters are the subsidy rate and the eligibility parameter. I'm going to play with those. Okay, I'll give you a roadmap in terms of effects, welfare, and so on, coming from variations along these 2 key margins. Okay, one extreme case is going to be a case when everybody is eligible. Okay, Yes, yeah. I is household income, and this is a threshold. Yes. Now the extensive margin. This is how we model the extensive margin. All these features that I said before generate naturally extensive margin. We're going to be thinking about additional reasons for women not to participate. So we're going to be thinking about this. At the start of life, households are going to draw a utility shock associated to joint market work for married couples. Okay, this is going to be a utility cost, and this is allow us to capture residual heterogeneity in terms of labor force participation. For a given household, we're going to draw this
How are you going to know about that?
following a suggestion you gave me 4 years ago.
Very good.
I'll tell you. I'm going to tell. But if you allow me to tell you, I'll tell you. Okay. This is going to be this draw is going to be conditional upon the type of the husband. So we're going to be looking at who is your hubby, and we're going to look at a distribution that is going to be conditional on the husband. Okay, and we're going to try to reproduce for every household the degree of labor force participation for every cell across female types. Okay, so we're going to have multiple distributions that are going to be conditional on the type of the husband. The key idea, and I'll show you data in a second. The key idea is to exploit the potential variation in wage rates of females and how this affects labor force participation of them within a particular class. Okay. As I will show you later, all the features plus this allow us to reproduce labor force participation across classes quite well. Okay.
And the type of the husband being the productivity?
It's going to be the intrinsic productivity of the husband, namely education. So.
Looking at the range of wife's wages.
Yeah. So, for example, I'm going to look at the college husband, and this college husband is going to have potential wives of different types, and these different types of the potential wage of the wife will increase with her type, and labor force participation will change accordingly. And this is how we discipline the distribution of this distribution. I mean, as I said, thank you, Victor. This comes from a long discussion you forgot about this.
You could put it also on wage, on productivity of a woman who are married.
Yeah, but we see wages of women varying conditional on the type of the husband and labor force. If you condition the type of the husband, the higher her wage, the higher her labor force participation, and that's the idea. Okay.
By construction, you match the labor distribution costs.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not.
It's a lot of work, but yeah, construction means work. Yeah, it's a lot of work.
Construction means you have some free parameters you can choose.
Yes.
It's the same amount of making things up as the other way around, where you're looking at the wages of the women, you see who's working, and you see these women who aren't working. Is it because they drew low wages, or is it because they have a high disutility of working? You can make it up, make it up.
I am going to say that we make it up in a nice way. So, yes.
This shock, we define that the distribution of the shock depends on who the husband is. Do they take that into account before marriage?
Sure.
So when they're married, they know.
So when that's a very good point. At the start of life, everything is given to you. I tell people who is your spouse.
Oh, who is your spouse?
Who is your spouse? I tell them you're going to be married, you're going to be single. Who is your spouse? I mean, think of this as people between age 25 and 30. I tell them whether you're going to be married or not. If so, who is your spouse? How many? I mean, when you're going to have children, if any. Okay. And
so that's an extreme version of
sure.
the assumption that Joyce and I use of your type. You're getting a type. You know who your potential spouse
yes.
will be.
Yes.
But you're actually assuming even more is known in terms of your.
So people don't choose their spouse, right?
No, I choose for them.
You choose.
Yes. And I mean, it's of course. I mean, we basically are not concentrated in the marriage margin. We're concentrated on who gets married with whom, potential labor supply, decisions depending on heterogeneity of different ways and so on.
Yeah,
Okay?
but here I think that the same thing that applies to welfare is going to apply here because it's the threshold. So if I am cohabiting, the income of the person cohabiting doesn't make it into the form, right?
Yeah.
And then I'm
Sure. Yeah. I know all that. Yes, cohabitors are always a problem. I dealt with them before. If you had the gut to read one of my papers, they are cohabitors endogenously, blah blah blah. But the bottom line is that in the aggregate they are not too many. I mean, this is a growing number, but they are not too many. So in the U.S.
Go to Sweden. Where
I know.
That's
Sweden
the
is
point. I mean,
yes,
it might be
yes. It is possibly endogenous. Yeah, we don't have cohabitors.
Is the problem with being married being conditional on education?
Yes. Preferences. I'm going to describe preferences. These are the preferences of single males, the boring agents. I mean, they're going to value consumption, which is a public good, and they're going to have this utility from labor. Okay.
Sorry, so last question. You know, why do you bother with all this marriage market? Why not just look at the effect of the childcare subsidy and a partial equity incentive? I mean, you're not. This is not going to.
Well, because
not allowing divorce. You know, that's 50% of
absolutely,
the US population.
because many. No, why? Because I want to think about married females in detail, and largely because the big pool of potential responses is right there. We're not going to find big responses in terms of single females. If we want to think about the potential big effects, I think we have to put the finger on a big chunk of potential responses, namely married females, and these married females are quite heterogeneous. And
I agree,
yeah.
but why don't you just start with married females and well, no, but they're going to be choosing.
No.
Oh, okay, you're not choosing them at all.
This is initial heterogeneity.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I misunderstood.
That's okay. So single males are these boring types. Single females are potentially we're going to have this utility coming from the time cost. Okay. So this is an indicator that kicks in if you are if young children are present for the single female. Now for this for married females and married males, young children may be there, and they're going to share the utility cost. Okay, the fact that half of the utility cost is shared is not key. What is important is that this utility cost kicks in if she works or the household has joint participation. Married males are the same. One thing, this gamma parameter, which is the free elasticity of labor supply, in principle, this curvature parameter is going to be common. Is going to be common across different types of households. Okay, so there's not going to be fundamental heterogeneity coming from the curvature on this side. Okay. Production, there's going to be a standard production for consumption and investment goods. There's going to be a linear technology for childcare services. So when I look at total output is going to be a standard output plus something coming from childcare services. In the US, this part is negligible. When we expand and we think about an expansion in the direction of Sweden, this is going to start becoming more and more important. Okay. So I'll show you just for the length of the talk. I'll show you the decision problem of a married household with children. Okay. So if you are married with children, you have an ugly looking problem, but it's not so ugly in the sense that I don't have to worry much about outside options. Okay. So suppose that your birth type is 1 or 2, namely you have children in the household. Think of me, okay? I have children living at home. I have a wife. So this is the value of a married couple, okay? I expanded the state variables so you can see them all. You have assets of the household, you have her level of human capital, her intrinsic type, his intrinsic type, a vector of additional heterogeneity for wages, the level of utility cost, the birth status and age of the household. Okay, so the household maximizes the sum of utilities of the male and the female, and this is the continuation value. Now, these are the budget constraints. Okay, if the household has access to childcare subsidies, okay, there is standard asset income after some taxes. There is labor income coming from him, coming from the wife, corrected by a payroll tax. The household is going to be paying taxes that are potentially non-linear that depend on income. Okay, this one here comes from the fact that there are children in the household. We take into account different tax schedules for married people with kids and without. And there is this part of childcare costs that are potentially subsidized. Okay. Well, if the household has income endogenously that is higher than the threshold, well, the household pays for childcare costs that are not subsidized. The last thing here is the law of motion of her human capital that depends on her type, the current level of age, whether or not she participates, and the age. Okay? Yes?
And then the question, what are the continuous variables here?
What are the continuous variables? Continuous variables are assets.
I'm not really trying to specify which ones you don't.
Let me answer. Assets, labor supply of him and her. Okay? Yeah. Yeah, of course we're going to discretize and yeah. So conditional on her participating, she will choose how many hours to work, and he will choose along the intensive margin. Okay. Okay. So that's the decision problem of married with children. Married without children is easier. Married retire is trivial and boring. Single people are you can guess it from here. So I'm not going to spend time on that. Okay. Now let me talk about what we do quantitatively. I'm going to think of a model period of 5 years. We're going to have 5 types: less than high school, some college, and post-college, and we're going to be consistent with both aggregate and cross-sectional observations. Okay. From data, we're going to read a number of things. We're going to read wage profiles for males, initial wages for females. So we're going to be consistent with an initial gender gap at the start of the life cycle. I'm going to read from an old paper from Mincer and Offek the depreciation rate for her skills. Okay. We're going to take a careful look at it. It's about, this number is about 2%, and it fluctuates 2% per year. It fluctuates depending on potentially on.
So why do you put all that effort into tax and you have the almost in what you want to do carefully, you're not putting more everything. You do have tax specific offices. That's why you want to put yours.
Okay, I take it. Okay. We're going to read demographic structure, and we're going to use our recent work to look at effective tax functions for different types of households. Okay. For childcare costs, we're going to look at childcare costs coming from the SIPP in 2005. So to give you an idea, the total cost for employed mothers who pay for between 0 and 5 is going to be about 10% of average household income in the economy. For older children, it's going to be between 7 and 8% of average household income. So, as I said before, younger children are more costly than older children. And we're going to look at the U.S. for the initial subsidy scheme. We're going to basically take a stand on the CCDF. So essentially, we're going to calibrate this so that, as in the U.S., which the subsidies are tiny, essentially going to poor people. About 6% of the poorest households with children receive the subsidy, but they are subsidized at the high rate, about 75%. Okay. So as I said before, we're going to calibrate the utility cost according to a distribution conditional on his type, and we're going to match parameters for married females in the in prime working ages, 25, 54. Okay. So, as I said before, well, I explained this before, but if you take a particular type of just 1 second. If you take a particular types of male, say a college male, and you read along this side, you see that the labor force participation of females tends to be increasing, and we discipline these distributions to reproduce in the aggregate this table conditional on everything else. Yeah.
Your childcare costs seem some low. I mean, the ones I know that come from Orazio,
well, they've been coming down a little bit, but they're low for relatively skilled people, but they're not so low for less skilled people.
Okay, no, I've seen those numbers as a function of average female wages, and it's more around 60%. So
sure.
That would mean something more in your area around.
Well, this is we think about the aggregate household income.
Yeah,
no?
I'm saying, so
Yeah.
you're using household income.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
These are also actual paid, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we do well in a number of number of features. I'm not going to explain much about this. As you can see, we're going to be quite close in terms of the participation rates of females as a function of their type, as a function of the childbearing status with and without children. Okay. So I'm going to say this is a good model to think about these issues. Okay. Now I'm going to we're going to do policy analysis. Okay. Yes.
The fridge, where's that coming from?
The fridge is coming from well, some estimates for males. We read. I mean, the estimates. Yes, the estimate. The fridge. Be careful. The fridge parameter, this gamma parameter, maps 1-to-1 with the empirical estimates that people do for males, for example. Okay. So we are using.
Yes, you're not using the model whatsoever to learn about it.
Well, the model has implications for an aggregate fridge, which is close to 1.
You have no, that's not what I'm asking. You have, you use some properties of the data together with the model to get those distribution costs.
Yeah.
Those are not independent of the choice of fridge.
Well, conditional, absolutely. Conditional on the choice of this curvature parameter, we infer everything else. So in the previous work, we did this for different values of this curvature parameter. So the distribution of utility costs changed, and as a result, this changed. Sorry, the mapping was still the same. The distribution changed. We found that one thing that we found when we dealt about taxes is that the choice of the curvature parameter is second order, because everything else adjusts, and the aggregate responses do not depend too much on that particular level. Yeah.
So it's based on males.
The choice of the curvature parameter is read from males, but we respect. But be careful, we respect all this. Yeah.
What is it?
What it is 0.4 now. I think it's 0.4. Well, one nice feature of this model, I'm going to be quick because time is flying, is that the gender gap is endogenous as people age. So just to give you an idea, this blue line is raw data from our reading of the data of the gender gap. Okay. And this is what the model generates. Okay, so the model generates this quite nicely. Keep this in mind. The childcare subsidies will affect what the model implies. So I'm going to tell you later what the model implies for how the gender gap endogenously changes upon changes in childcare subsidies. Yeah.
We could try to. This is non-target. This is endogenous. We could try to do this type by type, they can handle all the depreciation better. Yeah, we could try to.
Yeah. But in the aggregate, it's pretty nice. Okay. We're going to think about this expansion. The benchmark economy has 75%, and this threshold is 21% of household income, so only very poor people qualify. We are right now working on 3 levels of the subsidy rate, 50, 75, and 100%. And the eligibility is going to be 50% of mean income, and the extreme case where everybody is eligible. Okay. Well, of course, we're going to, being who we are, we're going to be doing things revenue neutral. We're going to come up with additional linear taxes on income to maintain revenue neutrality. Okay. Now, we're going to assume that the benchmark economy is a small open economy, so prices are not going to change across the steady states. Okay. That's going to be important for the welfare analysis that we will do. So here are some aggregate effects, okay, on a host of variables. The big thing that we find is that the effects on labor supply of females in the aggregate is big, okay. The married labor force participation goes up by in the extreme case by up to 10%. Total hours go up accordingly. Now, what is interesting here is that total hours go up by much less. What is interesting here is that there's a large redistribution of hours worked from those who are already females who are already working, males towards married females. Okay, so big changes on married females. Just 1 second. Big changes on married female. Relatively tiny changes on aggregate hours. Reductions in hours per worker. Okay, and as a result, no big effects on output. In fact, output can go down. This is a comparison across the steady states. I'll tell you about the transitions in a second. Okay. The tax rate can be big. Okay. Financing a subsidy scheme like in Sweden can essentially consume almost 2%. May require a linear tax rate of up to 2%, which is going to require about 1.5% of aggregate output. He has a question before. Yes.
There's hundreds of studies of the effect of childcare subsidies on labor supply.
Can you speak up a bit?
There's hundreds of studies of the effect of childcare subsidies on labor supply.
Yes.
On microdata. How does that compare? How do these implicit elasticities compare to what they find?
Well, I would say.
Is this a better way to do it?
Long question. I tell you, in terms of the responses, I would say we are in the same ballpark because the responses tend to be big as far as I read them. Okay, we get. Just to give you a quick idea. If you look at this case, for example, this case is essentially if you replace all distortionary taxes by a linear income tax in the U.S., you essentially generate half of this effect. Okay, so childcare subsidies generate big effects, and my reading of the empirical literature is that the effect on micro data is big. From micro labor studies, more aggregate work by Atanasio and co-authors. These effects are roughly in line.
That's my reading too, but that brings me to the second question: why is this a better way to do it?
Well, because if you want to think about policy analysis, I'm going to argue you need a model to take many things into account. Aggregate responses and equilibrium responses. Revenue neutrality. These changes in taxes are going to have big effects on welfare. I'm going to show you some of this. So you have to finance something like this, and this is costly, and some people are going to lose.
Yes. Some of those elasticities from those micro studies.
Well, we calibrate the elasticities. We're going to. Our implicit elasticities are consistent with what we see in microdata. Yeah.
So it's. Sorry.
The number of output is 0.3. What is about the number of relevant output?
relevant output.
The one that doesn't count childcare services as part of output. Because
Oh, then it's going to be unchanged.
because you're just hiring it shouldn't count as part of what you have available, things that are just hiring some women to take care of other women's children.
I mean, if you measure output in Sweden, you include
But
yeah.
they want to know part of it.
Oh yeah,
But
yeah.
that's just
I mean, this is. I tell you right now. For this case, I mean, this case where more than 1% is used for. I mean, this is going to be a negative effect on output. Yeah. So there's going to be a big. I mean, as I said before, big effects on participation, little effects on aggregate hours, small effects on output. And this is total output. So if you look at traditional notions of output, this is going to be negative.
So the increases in the human capital of women associated with
Yeah.
their experience do not even close
No.
to get to the gap of,
No.
of
No.
aggregate output for the reason.
Yes. So the big effects on labor supply of females and everything else that I said. I'm running. I'm sorry.
Just to understand again, what's the value added of all this that just said? Because yes, of course, you have to equal stances to
Yeah.
finance that, but I could have computed back of the envelope estimate of the cost of this,
Yeah.
and I could have plugged some elasticity of labor supply or
Sure.
anything, any distortionary effects of taxation back of the envelope. I think it would be useful to know
Okay.
how wrong I would have been relative to this complicated model.
I think that's a good exercise you could do.
It's a bit hard to know before you know the answer from the model. Then you can do the reduced form.
I'm not gonna
It's very easy. Exactly.
No.
You mentioned childcare subsidy.
Yeah.
Okay.
You just do the reduced form, and the envelope is a bit hard to know. But you
How,
Come on.
No, I mean, here is one thing, that's right. I mean, you will see that, for example, these policies will give a welfare gain for a very small group of people, but on aggregate, not, the majority of people will not gain. The small group of people will gain a lot. I think from an aggregate analysis, you cannot answer that question.
Well, but you can
Anyway.
Maybe we don't see the welfare results.
You use this model to answer the question with a number. I think that's a very simple.
I'm going to give him a number eventually. Not today because I don't have the back of the envelope number. Yeah, quickly because I have to. Yeah.
In Sweden and Norway, they used to have the early 90s very large subsidies to childcare.
Yeah.
It was strongly rationed.
Okay.
And also, then at some point they made a big expansion where essentially let big subsidies for all.
Mm-hmm.
So in your model, that should have big effects on the at least the labor force participation for women. So it would be interesting to take your model and just if you parameter the model for example Sweden and just see if you could.
We're doing that actually. Sweden is. I will tell you one thing quickly. Sweden is interesting for two things. For many things. Is individual instead of joint taxation, as you know, and Chaircare subsidies. So we can have. I'm going to have a slide sooner. It's going to be called Sweden.
Given that it's a small open economy, it's better to do it all for Sweden or Norway.
Well, the US is an open economy too. So the
it's not so small.
Yeah, not so small. I agree. Okay. Who changes participation more? Well, it's going to be fundamentally females with less skills, where essentially the pool of potential participation is. I mean, the effects are going to be big at the bottom. Okay, females who are early childbearers, because essentially they are the less skilled. They're going to react the most. Females with late childbearing are going to be those who are going to react less. Okay. They're going to be non-trivial effects on the gender gap implied by the model. Overall, across steady states, the gender gap, for example, for high school females at the end of the life cycle is going to be reduced by about 10%. Okay. So as Victor said, all these responses are not going to be enough to raise output sufficiently to justify these expansions. And I'm going to talk about now quickly about welfare because I don't have much time. I'm going to do this in different layers. 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Quickly about welfare. Welfare for all at the start of a transition between steady states. Okay, the effects on welfare are going to be negative. 1, 2. Younger people are going to lose. Everybody else, on average, younger people are going to win. Everybody else, on aggregate, are going to lose. Okay. You cannot find a majority support for this program at a. But let me finish. But Victor, if I'm going to give you this in a sequence. If you just bear with me for a second, okay? This number aggregates across all people. Aggregates across all people of the same age. Okay. Now I'm going to give you for different subgroups. Okay. So the aggregate number is negative. Okay. And when I count winners, okay, I don't find enough. I mean, in this extreme case, only 15% of people support this. Okay. If I look at who wins, okay, now I'm going to open up the welfare box. Okay. Who wins are going to be obviously, overwhelmingly, single females with children. They are going to love this. Okay, whether they are early childbearers or late childbearers. Okay. Married females with children are going to lose because they will have to pay additional taxes and they will not collect any benefit. And of course, married females with children early are going to win big. Married females with late children are going to win a little bit less. Okay. So there are this big asymmetry in welfare responses that come essentially from all the things that I briefly mentioned before. Okay.
So in terms of overall output in welfare, the results are very different from WG and Klein, right? So
well, they do the exercise a little bit different. They find welfare gains, not too big, but they find some welfare gains. I'll say something about at the end too, if I have time. Okay. Across the steady states, this is the last thing about welfare. I mean, if I ask you what the steady state you would like to be born into, okay, one with childcare subsidies and one without. I mean, this is a comparison about the steady states that I can do. Okay. We find that on the aggregate, newborns in the aggregate gain when they allow them to choose the steady state. Although, when I count winners, I can never find a majority for this, not even across the steady states. Okay. All right. So the welfare summary, there are asymmetries in welfare gains and losses. There are no welfare gains in the aggregate for those that are alive at the start of a transition. Okay. And there are only gains across the steady states for newborns, but there's no majority support. Okay. Conclusion: childcare subsidies lead to substantial effects, aggregate effects in terms of observables like married labor force participation, some effects on aggregate labor supply. The effects on married females is large, and in the paper we are discussing the effects across different groups. Households with children are going to gain, but they're going to be, on average, negative effects in aggregate welfare. Okay. Now, we're investigating more carefully this, but childcare subsidies are not going to be supported by a majority of the population. Okay. So that opens up the political economy of why you guys in Scandinavia have this at the massive scale, and it is not in this mode. Okay. All right, I'm done.